Questions for reflection. In our first reading, another excerpt from the powerful New Testament letter to the Hebrews. We are reminded that, quote, in the fight against sin, you have not yet had to keep fighting to the point of bloodshed. Are we fighting against sin? Do we treat sin as an adversary? In its explanation of the morality of human acts, the Catholic Catechism offers a sobering insight concerning a wrong exercise of freedom. And I quote, "Mortal sin is a radical possibility of human freedom, as is love itself," end quote. The Catechism explains that authentic human freedom cannot be realized in decisions made against God and against what is good and noble and true, because it is, as the text later explains, and I quote, patterned on God's freedom, end quote. Too often we forget that sin is a wrong choice, an abuse of freedom. We were created in the image of God, and at the very core, the heart of that image is the capacity to freely choose to respond to His loving invitation to communion with Him. From the first sin, the original sin, onwards, every sin is an abuse of that freedom and leads us into slavery. However, as the Apostle Paul reminded the Galatians, it was for freedom that Christ sets us free. I like to say, our freedom has been fractured by sin. And the cross is the splint which, when applied in our daily lives, restores our capacity to live freely again by making right choices. Are we fighting against sin? In our responsorial psalm for today's Holy Mass, we're invited to make the words of David the psalmist our own as we walk in a relationship with the Lord. As tenderly as a father treats his children, so Yahweh treats those who fear Him. He knows of what we are made. He remembers that we are dust. God is our Father. He's not some distant, removed force. God is a Father who treats His children tenderly. Do we really believe this? As we continue on in the Gospel of St. Mark, in the reading appointed for today's Holy Mass, this excerpt follows upon the miraculous signs of the kingdom which accompanied Jesus. He went home, and His disciples followed Him. On the Sabbath, He went to the synagogue and began to teach with profound authority, but the people would not accept Him because they knew His extended family, and He was just too normal. Yet this is how Jesus lived most of His life, whether in a carpenter's shop, learning a trade from Joseph, His foster father, or going to synagogue with His family. He was fully divine, and He was fully human. We are now in what is called ordinary time in the liturgical calendar of the Church. We often misunderstand the very term. There really is no truly ordinary time in the sense of mundane time, because time itself has been transformed by the Paschal mystery. The Eternal One, the second person of the Blessed Trinity, the Word made flesh, Jesus, has entered into history, and we are forever changed through His coming. Ordinary time presents us with an opportunity to consider again the fact that living as a Christian calls us to meet the Lord in the real stuff of our daily life. He is already there, walking before us and beckoning us to follow after Him. We do not walk these paths alone. The Lord has broken into our ordinary time, and He transforms it from within when we invite Him in. For those who have eyes to see His work, ears to hear His voice, in hearts open to receive His gifts of grace, ordinary time can become extraordinary. Do we find the Lord in our ordinary days? Do we invite Him to lead us through them and to transform them by His presence?